Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Patricia O'Leary, and I am a grad student in the Heritage Studies and Public History program at the University of Minnesota. I am working with the Bell Museum as an intern on online programs for the new exhibit, Climates of Inequality, Stories of Environmental Justice, a project of the Humanities Action Lab. Environmental justice addresses disproportionate effects of environmental problems, including climate change, on marginalized communities. This can happen from a lack of zoning laws that allow refineries, landfills, and high pollutant industries to be built dangerously close to these neighborhoods. I am here today with Savannah Wery and Juwaria Jama to talk about environmental and climate justice from the perspective of young activists. So Juwaria Jama is a high school student and state lead for Minnesota Youth Climate Strike. She works to advocate for her community against disproportionate pollution coming from highways and freeways nearby and factories. Savannah is getting a master's of education in social studies education and has a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Minnesota. She is a co-organizer of UMN Climate Strike, and she has led numerous climate strike protests on campus. So these are two very impressive people with me today, and I'm really excited to have you both here. And with that, let's get started. What does Climate Strike do?
Yeah, thank you for having us. I think I can start off with that question. So, our organization, Minnesota Youth for Climate Justice, we were originally known as Minnesota Youth Climate Strike. And the big focus when we first got started was planning strikes. And these strikes were an effort for students to leave school to protest against the climate inequalities and the lack of work being done to stop the climate crisis. And so the way that climate strike worked during the time that when school was open was we would have youth organizers, specifically school leads, that would help mobilize their students to leave school to attend these protests. And at these protests, we would be calling for our politicians to act on climate change. A lot of our work has been calling for our politicians to address the climate inequalities that are happening, to look at the intersections of race and climate and all of these things and how they tie together, and giving young people the tools and resources necessary for them to be able to organize within their own communities. So I think it's really hard to look at climate strike as a whole and pin it down to one thing, but yeah, a lot of our work is just mobilizing young people, giving educational resources, spreading the word about climate and environmental destruction, and trying to fix that and make sure that we don't have a climate crisis upon us.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Another huge thing that the state organization does is kind of doing some political policy lobbying work. Um, I know that the state organization has done a lot of work around fossil fuel divestment from the state pension fund, as well as three. And then at the university level, we've been focusing on fossil fuel divestment at the university.
And how is this organized, right? Because you're saying at the state level. When I heard how it was organized, I was pretty impressed. Can you break that down for me?
Yes, for sure. I think it sounds quite confusing to people who aren't involved. But so the way that we work is we're a statewide organization and we have an executive team. So our executive team is basically just the leaders of our teams. And so we have multiple teams in our organization. So we have like a communications team. So comms works specifically on working with the press and our internal communication. We have an outreach team that works on getting the word out, organizing young people, making sure we have school leads across the state. Our partnerships director helps us create partnerships with state because there's so many organizations that do this work and need to be uplifted. Our logistic director helps us plan our strikes, taking care of the logistics of who's going to be where, how we're going to handle it, the streets and all of that stuff. Our finance director takes care of our finances. And yeah, so this is we have team leaders, and within each of our teams, there are young people that work within it. But so that's like looking at the state as a whole. But within our state, we're organized within chapters. And so we have chapters across the state. We have the U of M chapter, which is amazing. I think we definitely need more colleges. And then we have our other chapters are broken by regions. So we have a Southern Minnesota region, we have a Duluth region, and then we have South Metro, North Metro, things like that. And so our chapters are all run by a chapter lead who helps just make sure that like they're delegating tasks and stuff. And I'm sorry, I feel like this sounds confusing, but yeah, within our chapters, each person who's in a chapter works within the teams. So it's like everybody's working within everything. And when we are not planning strikes statewide specifically, our chapters are working locally based on whatever the place they live in might need.
Yeah, so it's enough to keep you organized, yet wiggle room to be doing things on local levels so that you can change it up to wherever you need to be.
Right, like giving the power to organizers within chapters, but making sure that stuff are getting done at the state level as well.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And also just seeing how you do that so well. And how did you both personally get involved in environmental justice? What made you say that this is something you want to dedicate hours and hours of time to fight for?
Yeah, I can start. For me, I'd always been concerned about climate change and like kind of the physical piece of the climate crisis. And I think in college was the first time that I really learned about environmental racism and environmental justice and how like it's really a social problem. Um, and so I my junior year of college participated in a program off campus called HECUA, which is the Higher Education Consortium of Urban Affairs, where I did the Inequality in America program, which was all about social organizing and social movements and tactics and strategy. And so that was the first time that I ever kind of learned how to organize, like at like a theory level. And so the 2019 September 20th global climate strike, which when they were done Minnesota Youth Climate Strike, they were one of the main organizers. And so I attended that and they had us like send a text to some number where we could like get looped into the state org. And so yeah, I did that. And I didn't hear back for a little bit, but my roommate at the time decided that they wanted to bring that to campus because it wasn't super accessible for all students to get to St. Paul. And also because like the university has a lot of policy stuff, like it's kind of like its own little small city, small government. And so yeah, we got connected with the state org, which gave us like a lot of coaching and training to kind of like put together like the theory that I'd learned in my off-campus program with how to actually do that in real life. And I like the second I got connected with JJ and the other youth, I was like, I love this. Like they're just so smart and cool. And I'm going into education, like you mentioned. And so I like know that I want to connect organizing in my classroom somehow. And so, yeah, being able to do something climate related, just because that was always something of concern while kind of holding that human social piece.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been learning a lot about how science teachers are trying to incorporate that in their own classrooms. But what strikes me the most is that this came from learning and from passion and education. And this is all connected, right? It wasn't just throwing you into the fire to just start doing these big events. There was training, there was preparation, and there was like solidarity with each other for us to have the strength, because there will be a lot of pushback from even places that you don't think of. Like, and JJ, what about you?
Yeah, so I first got involved through my school as well. There was it, I guess you could say it happened through social media. My freshman year of high school, I remember scrolling and I saw someone post an event that was happening at the Capitol. And I told our advisor for our club at school, and he was like, we can go on a field trip there. So me and a bunch of my friends who were involved in this club took a field trip in January of 2019, and we went to the Capitol and we saw a bunch of young people that were talking about line 3 and were sitting down with the governor. And I think that was the first time that I saw young people given the power to talk to an elected official like that, because there were so many young people just sitting there and one governor, and they were all just speaking so passionately about line 3 and how it was destroying Minnesota if we allowed its construction to continue. So I you could say I was really fascinated by that. And one of the young people who were organizing ended up talking to me at the event and gave me her phone number. And yeah, from there she got me involved in organizing, and I started, being involved in a couple different orgs, just finding my way in. And I remember there was a day in which this adult ally asked me about my climate story, and her role was to help me think about my climate story and to think through it. And I remember for the first time being like, I don't think I have a climate story. But we ended up talking about my experiences living in North Minneapolis and the air pollution that I saw growing up outside my window, how um and how that really affected me and my childhood. And it made me realize that we all have climate stories, whether we're told that or not. And I think that was the push that I needed to feel even more passionate about this. But yeah, I think after finding out about my climate story, it became less of a passion and more of a need to organize. Because I feel like when you get exposed to the problems, it's no longer a passion, it's no longer something you do for fun, it's something you do out of necessity. And that's what it became for me.
Amazing. Yeah, and it's a good thing you mentioned that, is that if we all look at the neighborhoods around us, it's not just, oh, it's this people's problem, or it's like just in this state, or it's just in North Minneapolis. Like, no, this is a national issue, right? Like, as someone from California, I used to think it was normal that I have to hold my breath on a certain part of the street where the water plant is, to clean sewage. And then one day I realized, like, actually no. Why are all of these industries right here where I can smell them from home?
And I think one other thing that really mobilized and engaged me was that for so long I tried just focusing on like individual actions that I could make to like help limit my own carbon footprint, like composting, trying to limit the use of plastics and all of that. And I remember learning like that like 200 fossil fuel companies are responsible for 70% of emissions, and thinking about kind of like the power struggle of those who like like the disproportionate impacts of climate change of those who contribute the smallest amount get hit hardest with the impacts of climate change, whereas those who are responsible for a majority of um, the carbon emissions don't really feel the impacts of it. And so
Yes.
I think that that really drew me to organizing to like really kind of address that power dynamic, because like while individual action is important, like that wasn't what was going to solve the climate crisis.
Yeah, there needs to be bigger collective action to make a difference, not only with yourself, but on that government level, to
Yeah.
have zoning laws to protect communities from being hit with this. And speaking of, disproportionately getting hit, what have you two or the organization been doing to change things for COVID-19? How have things adapted, if so?
Yeah. So I remember we were planning this big Earth Day event last year, and all of a sudden COVID hit and we were like, "Oh, what do we do now?" And we ended up shifting to doing a 2-day webinar where our chapters did workshops on different issues on things like eco gentrification and race and climate and things like that. And we ended up shifting, instead of it being like a strike thing, it ended up becoming an educational thing where we were, doing workshops on all these topics and giving people resources to act. And I think now with COVID, some of our organizing hasn't changed, because we're statewide. A lot of us used to meet, I feel like we were all on Zoom before everyone else was on Zoom. So that dynamic didn't change, but we had to become a lot more creative, and intentional about the work that we were doing. Um, Especially with the uprisings this past summer, a lot of our work has just been like posting about toolkits and resources and trying to shift to mutual aid and doing more of that.
Yeah, it was a similar thing with University of Minnesota. We were trying to plan like a big cross-campus, cross-student group Earth Day event, but COVID hit and we were like, oh, we're not doing an in-person event. So we ended up doing, we were a part of the statewide webinar that JJ mentioned, but we also tried doing some other social media campaigns, like doing like a photo campaign where each of our members held up pictures saying like why you strike, and making videos like to post on social media to educate. We did one on Earth Day. We have done one about Line 3. So that changed a lot. And I also think another big thing that changed was, along with what Juwaria said about mutual aid, is also just like focusing on relationships internally. Um, One thing that one of the kind of coach mentors in the movement told us is that like change happens at the speed of relationships. And so making sure that we were taking care of each other first in order to continue to take care of the community. Um, and that like that's revolutionary in itself as well. But also, like Juwaria said, like over the summer, we just kind of like dropped divestment completely, put it on pause to show up in the streets for the George Floyd uprisings, um, and still haven't quite gone to like business as usual with divestment, especially with like Line 3 construction starting. So I think that we've just kind of become more flexible to meet like the immediate needs of our community, while still pushing divestment as well.
And for people who don't say divestment every day, like me, can you explain what you're talking about there?
Yeah. So one of the main campaigns policy wise that the state, Oregon, University of Minnesota had been pushing like 2019 and early 2020 was divestment from fossil fuels, which at the JJ might know a little bit more than me, but at the state level is like pulling the state pension fund money out of fossil fuels, to kind of try to limit like the profits of the fossil fuel industry. And so that's same at the university level too. Like we have a $3.4 billion endowment, that the Office of Banking and Investment like invests that money to try to get a return, which that increased money goes to a lot of different things that is like super beneficial, like buildings and financial aid. But we're like asking that they pull that money out of fossil fuels and put it into something that's more socially responsible,
Yeah,
and like
getting
more ethical.
money ethically, investing ethically.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Okay. So speaking of your activity on campus, right? And I know you mentioned this earlier, Savannah, about how you want to incorporate this sort of teaching in when you become a teacher after your master's in education. But how has your activism so far, how is it tied into your education and your future goals? Not to say that you need to know what job you're going to have in 5 years, okay, because I don't know what's going to happen in 6 months. Do any of us? But just some goals that you have. Doesn't need to be necessarily like a path, but what you want to see happen.
Yeah. So I can start. I want to be a teacher and I want to be a social studies teacher. And so a few things kind of I think about immediately. And the first is like working in solidarity with youth. that like I'm 23 and still a youth, but like an older youth, and to work alongside high school students, and like Juwaria is 17, I believe, but like she's the state lead and I've learned so much from her and like learned so much alongside. And that's true with all of the high school students. And so I think that that's really informed kind of my like pedagogical approach to teaching, of like what my teaching philosophy is going to be, is not that like I'm a like leader of the classroom as a teacher, but that like we're together, like I'm learning from you, you're learning from me, like we're learning together. And yeah, that I think that organizing has given me just a taste of that in like real life practice. And then another piece is just thinking about the ways that I can like explicitly in the social studies classroom, like talk about power dynamics, like in our school system, in our community, and like help empower students to challenge those things. Just because like I've been a student at the U of M who is trying to like challenge this power structure, and encouraging like students at their schools to do the same thing.
Yeah, so just being able to have that interdisciplinary, but also different age groups to be able to work together and learn together. And I think that's really important because I mean, even just talking to you too, I learned things. So, and I'm supposed to be like the oldest, but we can, young at heart. JJ, do you have any ideas for your future goals with this?
With the climate movement in general or school?
Either. You don't have to mention school. You can say what you want to see, how you want to be as a person, your goals for climate justice.
Yeah, I remember I think it was during the summer because time is not real, but I remember there was a training that Take Action did, and we were basically imagining the world in 40 years, if we were to do a just transition, and what imagining what the world would look like from our perspective. And I remember like during this like brainstorming process, I was just thinking of like going to a park and seeing it all green, being able to breathe in air that's fresh and crisp and does not taste of any toxicants, and being able to, see kids running around having food at the park where everyone's, feeding each other. And I think like that's the world that I want to live in, and that's the world that I really hope to see. um Mutual aid makes the world go round. I think I really want to see a world in which we're all feeding each other, we're all giving each other the things that we need to survive, and we have a planet to live in. So yeah.
I love that. And for people who want to get involved in this, who want to be part of environmental justice but don't know where to start, what advice do you have for them? I mean, for either of you, social media, or do you have an account they should follow? Like, what should happen here?
Yeah, I would say starting locally. Locally is the best way to get involved, and it may seem hard, but I think depending on the area that you live in, honestly, just searching up accounts, right? If you live in a different state, like searching up your state, and then maybe like climate movement or climate justice and things like that, and you'll probably be able to find a bunch of climate orgs or accounts, and from there, doing the first step of reaching out and introducing yourself and showing up. Um, Something that I've learned through organizing is once you start showing up to places, people are going to get familiar with who you are. Like your face is going to be known. And, once you start showing up over and over again, you're starting to understand the place that you're in, and people are going to be able to like help you and give you, tools that you need to, be a more effective organizer. So yeah, start locally, show up.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think another piece is like you don't need like training to get started. And so if there's something that is like unjust at your school or in your community that you want to see change, like you can just start, and then as you're going, get connected with another org for support. Like for example, me and my roommate started trying to plan a University of Minnesota climate strike in like right after the September 20th climate strike, but we didn't get connected with JJ in the state org until like mid-November, which was it was a lot easier once we had that connection, but like that, like nothing is stopping you from just like getting together a group of friends, starting a group at your school. Like if you have that initiative and that drive, you can just start and then get connected with people that are already doing that work, just so that you don't have to like start from scratch.
Exactly. And I feel like as you get started, you'll start to meet people who are doing this, who have that experience to help along the way, as long as you're visible or doing something to to make it known that you're doing this work. So I mean, thank you for that. And that is the last question. So this has been amazing, and very insightful, and also inspiring for myself even. But I hope that people watching, regardless of age, can take inspiration from both you, Savannah, and you, JJ. And for everyone watching, you can visit the exhibit digitally at Bell Museum's website, or see it in person starting March 12th with an advanced reservation. So that will be Climates of Inequality, Stories of Climate Justice. Now, thank you both for joining, and thank you to the Bell Museum for making all of this possible. And with that, I bid everyone farewell.